Okay. Next up is I'm the Only One Loved by the Constellations. This is a manga review. This is an online webcomic. Currently, as this review, it has 22 chapters. It is free on the internet. There is no official English publisher. And so I have links in the show notes for the volunteer translators and also the aggregator group. And here is the novel manga description. The hunter from the Seoul Tower, Baek Ho-Min, fell into despair after obtaining the trash skill, Reminiscence. However, he keeps receiving the love of the constellations every time he activates the skill. Ah, why do the constellations only love me? A fantasy story of the serious constellations inside his head. And I think that novel description does not do this story justice. It may just be the translated version of it, but this is essentially a regressor story with a very interesting twist. Most regressor stories, if you know what they are, somebody from the future essentially has this big conflict and they die, or they get some opportunity or some token or whatever to travel back into their own past. So they're not traveling back into the past beyond where they live. So it's somewhere in their lifespan, and they get a chance to essentially relive their life over with all their foreknowledge. So this is very often used to make a very overpowered character who knows all the secrets of the towers, all the little mini quests or quirks or exploits or whatever the case is, right? And so it's a very interesting way to make an OP character who still has to work for it, because they're still the same underpowered normal character they are, and they're just reliving the life using future knowledge for the most part, but they still have to work hard to gain that power. In this particular case, the twist is that while the main character is still doing this kind of regressor thing, he doesn't have access to any of that future knowledge from his previous lives. Instead, every time he dies, essentially, his whole life resets. He's reincarnated back into like that same timeline future, but the person who dies is sent to the same kind of mindscape in his brain, or in the constellation universe, which is kind of their fancy way of saying like gods or people who have ascended or whatever. And so in the beginning part of the story has the main character who died at the start talking to the other iterations of himself who chose different pathways. Like this one main character might have chosen the warrior path and become like this amazing sword artist, right? Another main character might have chosen, alchemy, and another main character might have chosen magic or whatever the case is. And there are hints that there are even like tons of other characters who chose like a completely different things, but these are the ones that still have an interest in the current iterations of their own personal lives. Now, the only problem for them is that they cannot communicate with themselves. They can't communicate with their current iteration unless he gets this super trashy power called Reminiscence. And that's to everyone else, it's a terrible power. It's a low level, but for this main character, because he has this situation where his other iterations are starting to communicate because of his ability, that's where their memories come into play, and that's where their knowledge of like the pathways that he can potentially take and the dangers that exist come into play. And I thought it was really well done, the fact that they're not just directly telling him things, but they can only give him hints through like the ways that they're creating. And it's as simple as like, they like this, and that's the best thing they can give as to what path he should take. And I like the ability, of course, that it's a good twist. I like the fact that he's not overpowered necessarily, that he still has to make his own mistakes, that he still has the ability to become a little overpowered, but not so much. And as the story progresses, again, it's only 22 chapters in, he gets into like these bigger and bigger plot lines and enemies and allies. And it's just kind of fun to see this kind of regressor story with this interesting twist. So the main character doesn't have direct access to all that foreknowledge, but it exists somewhere. And like his other self, his other iterations are trying to communicate with them and help him essentially overtake the mistakes that they've necessarily made, or the plot holes, or getting advances, and try to save mankind, which is ultimately always the big goal of all these kind of stories. So for me, had a good time with it. The artwork is really nice. The artwork is clean lines, good stuff. Gets a score of 7.6 out of 10 for me. That's slightly above, average. Had good storyline, but again, it's a little early. I was waiting until at least had 20 chapters before I reviewed it for you guys. I'm the only one loved by the Constellations, with the score of 7.6 out of 10, because I thought it was rather well good.